What's up, everyone? My name is Kat Jones, and I want to introduce you to a new podcast I'm working on called Hot Blooded. In a nutshell, it's a new project where I interview musicians about love, romance, sex, and whatever else comes up along the way. Much like you, I am quarantined in my home during this very strange time in world history, so I'm recording this in my bedroom in Brooklyn, New York. But before we get into the real meat of what the podcast is, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about myself and explain more about what I'm doing. So, for those of you who aren't familiar with me or my work, I've been a music journalist for about 11 years. Most of those years spent focusing on rock and roll and metal or whatever quote-unquote dark music sort of exists on the fringe of those two things. I'm currently the editorial director of a heavy metal brand called The Pit, where I oversee all things sort of leather jacket and long hair related that go up on the website, the social media, the YouTube channel, all that. Prior to that, I worked for Kerrang! Magazine, where I wrote about and interviewed rock stars, but also did things like produce the New York iteration of their K-Pit series, which is their YouTube series where big bands like Baroness, Sum 41, Daughters, Fit for an Autopsy, Gatecreeper, bands like that, and a bunch of others came and played a tiny Brooklyn dive bar for 100 people. And I also produced and wrote season 1 of their documentary-style podcast series, Inside Track. Now, I've also lived all over the place. I grew up in a relatively rural Northern California college town called Davis. If you've ever seen the movie Lady Bird, Davis is the place near Sacramento where the main character didn't want to move because it had too many farmers in it. After that, I lived in San Francisco for a couple of years and Portland, Oregon for 6 years, and finally moved to New York City about a year and a half ago in the fall of 2018. During all that time, I wrote for places like Vice, Sacramento News and Review, SF Weekly, Willamette Week, and blogs like Metal Sucks and Invisible Oranges. I also did dirtbag shit like hop in the van with underground noise rock and metal bands and drive across the country for no money, and other things like that you do when you're a broke, adventurous metalhead making it work. Throughout all of that, the biggest takeaway that I've learned is that there's absolutely no greater love in the world than the one that you'll find in rock and roll. The love between a fan and their favorite band, the love between a musician and their audience when they're on stage, the love between someone on the road and their significant other that they miss terribly at home, the love and sometimes hate between band members, the love that surges in your chest when a package arrives with a record that you pre-ordered months earlier and you finally get to rip it open and put it on the turntable for the first time. I've always been incredibly inspired by this special kind of love that you find in this community of weirdos, especially the ones who create art that's seen as somehow dark or evil by those who don't understand it. So, to get back on track here, this podcast has kind of been in the back of my mind for over a year now. I first got the idea when I interviewed one of my goth heroes, Peter Murphy of Bauhaus, for Kerrang! Last year. It was the week of Valentine's Day, and no one loves romance more than a goth, so I decided to talk to him about love, the daunting power of it, the inspiration it gives us, what life is like in Turkey with his wife, etc. And I had so much fun doing it that I realized that I wanted to ask everybody these questions. Now, obviously, I can't spend the rest of my life weaving themes of love into every single article I write, so I decided to start a podcast. And I named it Hot Blooded after the Foreigner song, and if you know me or follow me on social media, you know I love Foreigner. So each episode will be an interview with a musician that ties into love somehow, whether it's conceptual, personal, or completely off the wall. Obviously, the world looks a lot different now than it did when I first started thinking about this concept. And to be honest with you, I almost scrapped the idea because I felt like it was so self-serving to start a podcast right now when we're in the middle of a pandemic. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that love is what's going to get us through this thing. Whether it's loving each other and sending support to people struggling with isolation right now, or remembering how exciting falling in love is so that when we're out of this mess, we can date more earnestly or at least look forward to the adventures that sex and love brings into our lives. Or Maybe you're sick of looking at your partner that you're co-quarantined with right now, and you need to be reminded why you fell in love in the first place. Either way, I hope you find these stories about love to be as inspiring and entertaining as I do. The first episode featuring King Buzzo of the Melvins will be live soon, and if you're feeling trustworthy and adventurous, you can subscribe via all podcast platforms and also on Patreon if you want to toss me a few dollars every month. The podcast is entirely DIY with no distribution or ads, so any money I make will go directly toward upkeep or paying a few of the amazing people who help me out. I'll be back soon, but until then, please take care of each other.